In the beginning of the film, we see Pippa and Thomas have just moved into their first apartment in Montreal together. The two are excited to settle down to start a new life together. Later in the afternoon, Pippa announces to Thomas that she does not want to have children for the moment. At least not for 4 years. Pippa explains to him that she has always been absorbed in her studies and has never really had the opportunity to have fun in her life. She never did anything extraordinary that she would remember all her life. Thomas agrees with her, and they then kiss to validate their agreement. At that moment, they find that their window looks directly into the apartment across the street, where they see a man with a professional studio who is photographing a woman. Pippa and Thomas then have fun watching the photographer while he is now taking action with the latter. Although Thomas feels like continuing to watch them, Pippa interrupts him, telling him that they shouldn't spy on their neighbors like that. The next morning, Pippa leaves for work. She works as an optometrist trainee in the shop L'Optique. Easy to remember as a name. At work, she receives a bird feeder as a gift from her boss to brighten up her new home. When she returns home, she and Thomas continue to observe their neighbors and wonder what kind of people they can be. They then decide to give them nicknames. They will now be Margot and Brent. The same night, Pippa cannot sleep and therefore decides to continue to spy on her neighbors through the window. She sees Margot coming out of Brent's apartment. She feels strangely attracted to Brent and even turned on by his muscular body. The following evening, she returns from work with binoculars so that Thomas and she can observe their neighbors more closely. They discover that Brent has invited a model to dinner. In fact, he regularly seems to have affairs with different supermodels when Margot is away. As the two see Brent having fun with the photo model, Pippa begins to fondle Thomas and is all aroused by what she sees. She would like Thomas to do the same for her. Later that night, Pippa still suffers from insomnia and decides to go see what Brent is up to. She sees at this moment that Margot has returned and feels bad for her. She probably doesn't know that Brent is cheating on her. A few days later, Pippa goes out with friends and confesses that she would like to know what her neighbors can be saying to each other. One of his friends tells him that Thomas knows a way to listen to another room using a laser pointer. Pippa then convinces her boyfriend to explain how it works. Thomas therefore explains to him that to do this, they need a reflective surface to send the laser back towards them, and thus be able to hear what their neighbors are saying to each other. So, for this to work, they need to mount a mirror on the studio wall for the laser to bounce back to their apartment. That's when Pippa sees that Brent and Margot seem to be having a disguised Halloween party at their house. She then has the idea of joining the party as mere guests. The couple have a great time and Pippa slips away for a moment to place a mirror in the apartment without anyone noticing. Pippa and Thomas then return home and finish preparing their installation. After many adjustments, they finally manage to listen to the conversations of their neighbors. They are then almost sure to hear Margot confront Brent about his adultery. Brent categorically denies the accusations and on the contrary criticizes Margot for not being in love with him. Brent then berates Margot and convinces her that her suspicions are unfounded. Pippa and Thomas are shocked to see them arguing but can't do anything to stop them. The next day, surprisingly, Margot goes to the store to change her glasses. It actually turns out that her name is Julia. Pippa then gives her an eye exam to check her eyesight. Then, she hands him her new glasses fitted to her eyesight and tells him that she is a beautiful woman. Before leaving, Julia invites Pippa out on a date, which she accepts. Back home, Thomas observes Brent who is cheating on his girlfriend with another of his models. That same evening, Pippa tells Thomas that she has met Julie and that she is going out with her this weekend. Pippa begins to feel really bad for Julia and would like to reveal to her that Brent is cheating on her, but Thomas insists that they should stop spying on their neighbors. He adds that they should rather focus on their relationship to themselves rather than taking care of that of others. However, as soon as Thomas leaves, Pippa continues to observe them and notices that Julia tries her best to reconcile with Brent following their argument the day before. On weekends, Julia and Pippa go to the spa together and talk about their respective lives. Julia reveals that she was a photo model in the past, but that she stopped because she felt permanently objectified and sexualized. Julia then reveals that her husband is actually called Sebastian and that he is a famous photographer. Sebastian is a very eccentric person, but Julia thinks she couldn't do anything without him. Pippa then thinks seriously about revealing everything to Julia about Sebastian's infidelities, but finally decides to keep it all to herself. The days pass and Pippa still continues to spy on her neighbors. One day, she even discovers Sebastian with two models at the same time. Then, she sees him throwing their protections. One evening, Pippa managed to find a way to access Julia's Wi-Fi printer. She then uses it to anonymously reveal to Julia Sebastian's adultery episodes, and speaks in particular of the protections as proof of her remarks. Just then, Thomas wakes up and catches Pippa spying on the neighbor couple. He is shocked to learn that Pippa told Julia everything about Sebastian, despite the fact that they had both agreed not to interfere in their neighbors' lives. After learning the truth, Julia grabs a knife and tries to kill her husband but is ultimately unable to and bursts into tears all night. The next morning, Pippa apologizes to Thomas and promises to stop spying on their neighbors. However, a few days later, they see Sebastian discover Julia's body in the bathroom. She finally slit her throat. Thomas is totally devastated to learn that through their fault, an innocent girl committed suicide. So he decides to move on and take a step back. He can no longer stay with Pippa. Pippa is heartbroken by Julia's death and holds herself responsible for what happened. Despite this, she decides to continue observing Sebastian. One evening, she sees him leaving and decides to follow him. She then follows him to a local bar and walks in to find him. Sebastian sits down next to Pippa and strikes up a conversation. He then invites her up to his apartment to take some pictures of her. Pippa hesitates at first, then finally agrees to go to his house, feeling sad for him. In Sebastian's studio, he tells him that his last exhibition will start in a few weeks and invites Pippa to accompany him. He then takes pictures of her and tells her that she is really beautiful. He then convinces her to take off her clothes to pose nude, which she accepts. He also takes off his clothes as he takes the pictures. At that moment, he breaks down and tells her that she reminds him of his wife. He then recovers and kisses Pippa, who does not resist him, and finally ends up making love together. At the same time, Thomas comes home and feels remorse for leaving Pippa alone. He then finishes a drink Pippa had left in the fridge and pours some into the bird feeder as well. Suddenly, he notices Pippa across the street, having sex with Sebastian. He is absolutely overwhelmed to see his wife cheating on him with her own eyes. The next morning, Pippa returns to her apartment and discovers, terrified, Thomas who has hanged himself. A few days pass and Pippa is totally lost and down in her life. She decides to visit her friend Ari and tells her everything that happened. Pippa maintains that everything happened by her fault and that she should never have cheated on Thomas, but Ari replies that she did nothing wrong. She felt alone and desperate. Although she knows that her infidelity caused the death of Thomas, she decides to go to Sebastian's exhibition all the same, convinced that seeing him one last time will help her to turn the page. So, Pippa and Ari go to the exhibition together. Sebastian introduces everyone to Julia, who finally turns out to be alive and well. Moreover, the main subject of the exhibition is the couple of Pippa and Thomas. Sebastian and Julia reveal that they are in fact the owners of the apartment rented by Pippa and Thomas. The couple thought they were spying on their neighbors, but in reality they were the ones who were spied on by Sebastian and Julia from the start. Pippa is horrified by this revelation and storms off. She goes to Sebastian's apartment and finds the room from which the two were spying on them. Pippa explodes in anger and destroys everything in the room, but knows very well that she can never go back. The past is the past. She therefore decides to move again and leave this apartment for good. Before leaving, she checks the feeder and finds that some birds are dead just below. She then deduces that Thomas did not commit suicide but was in fact poisoned. During an interview, Sebastian declares that in the rental contract signed by Thomas and Pippa, there was a clause specifying that they agreed to be photographed and that therefore it was totally within their right to spy on Pippa and Thomas. Especially knowing that they did the same. Once the interview is over, Sebastian and Julia return home and find a bottle of wine offered as a congratulatory gift in front of their door. As they both enjoy a glass of their gift, Pippa sends a message to their printer stating that she knows they killed Thomas. Sebastian and Julia then go looking for Pippa, saying they just want to talk to her. Pippa arranges to meet them at her shop, where she confesses that she knows the truth. She knows that when she was with Sebastian, Julia poisoned Thomas' drink and then staged his suicide only so that Sebastian and Julia could make money out of Pippa's misery. Julia then replies that there was nothing personal, that they only did what they had to do. Suddenly, Julia loses consciousness. Pippa then reveals to them that she has poisoned their wine and that he in turn will pass out. After the couple are unconscious, Pippa takes them to an eye surgery machine and laser burns the cornea. A few weeks later, a new couple moves into the apartment where Pippa and Thomas lived. They in turn observe Sebastian and Julia in their studio, who are now both blind. Pippa watches them from the roof and is now relieved to see them suffer. Then, she places her binoculars on the ledge and decides to finally move forward in her life and turn the page. If you enjoyed this summary, consider watching the entire film. Don't hesitate to press like and subscribe to our channel to discover other very different films. Also give your impressions of this film in the comments and click on one of the videos that appears on your screen to enjoy another summary.